I'm Rhea,
I'm Ruth,
and this is Mom Brain,
or Mum Brain.
where we discuss topics including stages of ages, parenting through grief, letting adult kids be adults, maintaining self, and more.
And I was having this conversation with one of my kids the other day about change,
Hmm.
and she's not a particular fan of change.
Hmm.
It not that it scares her, but like it makes her just have that little bit of, oh, I'm not sure now, and there's
Yeah.
a bit of fear arises in her, and it's not something that she's overly comfortable with. Um, and if you'd asked me prior to understanding my brain a little bit better, I would have said, I love change. Like, bring on change, change is good. And I think that's a really interesting thing about ADHD, and especially as for mums or
Yeah.
moms, as you would say. Um, like there is a love of routine and planning and knowing what's going to happen. But then there's also that other part of your brain that's going, I want something different. What's going to happen today? So I do thrive on change, but it also exhausts me at the same time. And I'm
Yeah.
pretty good in a crisis, like the broken arm or something happening. I can plan, I can react to it really quickly, but the result of that is that I end up exhausted. Um,
Yes.
yeah, so
Or we
it's
kind of fumble, like we may leave something out or miss something or something like that. That's one thing that it took me having someone else to kind of point certain things out. And now I'm like, hey, can you remind me to do this? Can you remind me? I love dry erase boards. I have them all over the place. Now,
yeah,
I could probably use them more, but I have them there and I use them more than I wouldn't. So
yeah.
calendars, alarms, dry erase boards are my best friends.
Same. I've got one sitting over there. We call them whiteboards in Australia, just for
Oh yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So
so- which is really funny.
whiteboards, I know.
But
And then so okay, let's not squirrel because I feel myself doing that. Um 80, so if you're listening, you can't see what's going on, but my brain is doing the thing where I have to get myself back on track.
yep.
Um,
Otherwise, we'll be talking about the names of different things across different countries like that.
because
And
that's where my brain was going. Um,
yeah, I can
yeah,
see that.
so just having him, having a partner to say, hey, I see things from the outside. This is what I'm noticing. This is what I'm,
Mm,
experiencing in you. And also as a mom, if you think of like, especially because we've both been through divorce, if you think of all the different versions of us we give our
mm,
kids and the things that we go through and all the while we're going through from being strict on routines to being relaxed on routines to finding this combination that we have to find that works for us. Our kids are there for all of that, and so they're there when we're chaos, not paying attention to everything we should be, and we're forgetting things and we're so
mm.
unbalanced. And then to where we're like, okay, rein it in. Everything's got to be like this. And they're like, what is happening? It's they have to adjust to all these things too,
Mm.
just as we do. I saw a post recently and it was uh, like, be patient with your mom. She was learning too, or something like that.
Yes.
And it's so true because
Mm.
whether you have a child young like me and where you have a child a little bit older like you, and I say a little bit older as in you weren't a teenager, right? Like
No, it was 27, I think, when no, 27,
so
28 when I had come. Yeah.
yeah, so whether you're having a kid as a teenager or you're heading towards your 30s, this this it's probably less likely to be as many changes if you have a child a little bit later in life because you're typically
Mm.
typically are a little bit more stable than hopefully than as a teenager.
14. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it's we all go through it on different levels, whether you have ADHD or not. But I can say that having ADHD, and I knew since I was 7. So that's another kind of
Mm.
difference within the two of us. You found out later on in life and you didn't have your whole life to learn and recognize these things. And then having out of my 5 kids, 3 have ADHD also. So it's like I spread it around nicely. It's just threw it around everywhere.
Yeah,
And then
nothing like sharing genetics.
right, right. You're welcome.
Yeah, yeah.
And then how many of your kids have been diagnosed with ADHD, if any?
Um, Only one has been diagnosed, which is what led me down the track as well, because when we had a meeting with her psychologist to like find out what she was like as a child and that kind of stuff, and I was, chatting away, and honestly, like this child of mine, I don't know, she's going to kill me for saying this, but I'm sure she won't mind because we have talked about what it's okay to talk about, what it's not. But um, she was always quirky, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
And for those not watching, I put that in air quotes. Yeah, she looked at life differently. She was this, she was almost like this fairy creature. She was just beautiful. We used to
Uh-huh.
call, like, say she was off with the fairies, and she kind of lived in a different reality to the rest of us. And I loved that because I grew up with really, really controlling parents in a very strict household. My dad was military, so
Mm,
there was not really that room for self-expression. So she's my third, and when I had her, I was like, be you, be you, be you. Like, it was amazing.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then as she grew up, she struggled with some stuff, and I didn't really have a great understanding of neurodivergence at that stage. Obviously, it was being talked about, but it was also being talked about quite negatively.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something I'd considered. And then, sort of post separation from my ex husband, the kids all had counseling with therapists, psychologists, whatever, and found their way. But I wanted them to have extra support. And it was during COVID, so there was a lot sort of going on in their worlds. And the psychologist, she's adorable, and she brought me in to discuss, Pippa's childhood. And I was talking about all of these things where she was all quirky and funny and different, whatever. And but I kept going, but that's normal for kids, isn't it? And aren't kids just, kids are themselves, because
Yeah.
I felt, looking back, I, I was quite, restricted from quite young.
Yeah.
And, um, and she was just laughing, this psychologist. And afterwards she said to Pippa, I think your mum might have ADHD as well. And Pippa was like, guess what, mum? I think you've got it too. And I was like, oh, really? So it's been a very interesting, it's only been 18 months or so since she was diagnosed, but it has helped her greatly to understand her. And she's in her latter years of schooling. She's in her final year of, we call it high school over here, but her final year of school. And it's really helped her with understanding how her brain works around her studies and exams and all that kind of thing. So she's the only one diagnosed. Having said that, there is definite neurodivergence with the other three of mine as well. And
Hmm.
I have three stepchildren, and we've been exploring this with them too. And my partner and I have only been living together for, like, blended family wise, for about 18 months. And all 9 of us definitely sit somewhere in the spectrum of neurodivergence. My youngest, my stepson, he is 12. He was diagnosed with autism and ADHD. And it's just all of us in various ways. So it's, I don't know, there's parts of me that wishes I'd looked into this earlier for them, because then it's probably a whole other podcast, but they would have had that better understanding of themselves younger. But you only know what you know. And
Yeah.
I didn't really know. It wasn't until Pippa went down this route and said, Mum, my psychologist thinks that I have ADHD. And then I started researching, and we started talking. And then my stepson was diagnosed. So there was more research and more conversation, more understanding. I started talking to, and funnily enough, some of the women that were coming into my life through my work were also in that space of kids with ADHD or autism. So I was learning from them as well. And yeah, it's a huge learning curve, but I think the compassion that it brings to understanding ourselves and each other is so important in the world that we live in.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. 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 All those things. I mean, it's like I said, I was diagnosed very young, right? But
Mm,
when I was in elementary school, I stopped taking medication because I wanted to,
mhm,
and that was okay. Um, and then I was in therapy as a kid, but it was for other things.
mhm,
Um, and then it wasn't really until I was an adult that I put myself back in therapy.
mm.
Because for a really long time, and this may be shocking because I rave about therapy, but I was very against therapy for a really long time. I thought it was a crock, it's just money grab and blah, 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 whatever. And then I went to school for psychology and I was like, oh, like, no, everything I thought I knew was wrong.
Yeah,
And, uh, understanding ourselves gives us the ability to understand our kids, but it also gives us the ability to be to more kinda cater our parenting to them, and
mm,
and I like I said, I've had the diagnosis since I was little, but it wasn't really until I was an adult that I actually factored it into my life, factored it into how I parent, how I function as an adult,
yeah,
the choices that I've made, the choices that I still make, things like that. It wasn't until I was older that I really understood it
mm,
and understood how it impacted my whole life, and what I can do to make it not be a negative factor in my life to it can be a thing
yeah,
like, yeah, I had that diagnosis, but I choose to make it make me a better person. These are the strengths
yeah,
I have. Because of this, I can also do this and this and this, in ways that maybe other people can't.
mm.
When I wanna learn
It
something, like, I learn it, and I learn everything about
yeah,
it.
yeah. It's really interesting because I was talking to a lady the other day, and we were discussing labeling, like, whatever the label may be.
Mhm.
Um, and especially with neurodivergence, and she said something that I was like, "Yeah, that's really cool." I'm not necessarily proud of this with what I know now, but when my kids were younger and I did start to think, okay, maybe there's something here that's a bit different. Um, which to be fair, I didn't really see as different because my brain's like that too. So it kind of all made sense to me. But
Yeah.
um, a couple of them were having trouble fitting in at school or not copying some crap and bullying and there was some things going on. And I was like, okay, maybe there are some signs of some stuff going on in their world. But at
Yeah.
that point, I was like, that was when things were quite negative about neurodivergence. And I was like, I'm not having my kids labeled, I'm not having them grow up with that. And now I'm like, why did I do that? But,
Yeah.
like you said, the beginning, making mistakes, part of parenting.
Yes.
But, now my brain's gone off on a tangent too. Where was I going with this? Ugh. Um, yeah,
So
one of
y
the things that kind of came in for me with learning this and talking to this lady, that's where I was the other day.
I was
Um,
like, "She'll get there. She got it. She's
yeah,
got
well,
it."
I'm there, I'm there. Oh, she said I was talking about the fact that I see a large part, particularly with ADHD, but also with what I'm beginning to learn about autism, that there's so much creativity and, like you said, that ability to
Yeah.
focus and really delve into stuff and explore and that kind of thing. And this lady said to me, that she sees it, and I'm not saying this is right, and I'm not a professional, so I'm just going to qualify that. But
Mhm,
she was like, I see it as there's left brain and there's right brain,
mhm.
and there's this whole spectrum in the middle. And every human sits somewhere on that spectrum where they are more left brain driven or more right brain driven. And it doesn't actually matter. It helps us to understand ourselves, as you said, but it doesn't matter because all of that is beautiful and all of that has value. And it's not a disability. And also, it's not an excuse to go, well, I have ADHD. I'm going to use that because that's what I have. I have ADHD,
Right,
and that means that I can't, or I won't, or I'm not.
right.
I'm still sort of learning about these sides of things, but I don't want my kids to think that because they have a diagnosis of something, it means that they can't. It just means there's a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, you might just have to learn a little bit differently. Um,
Yeah.
I've with my youngest, so he's in a private school, And, every month we're like, sure, we don't want to put him back in public school. This is expensive for one. But the benefits and, I'm not going to go off on like a advertisement for private school, but the benefits that we've noticed are being able to be in smaller classrooms and, just different things like
Mm,
that. When you ha okay, so he was diagnosed last year.
mm,
He started kindergarten on the computer, and then he went straight into school. Before that, he had been at home with me or my
mm.
mother-in-law or my mom, and we were just kinda like, "Oh, okay, well, it's just it's the COVID adjustment." You start a kid out on the
Yeah,
computer
yeah.
in school who, has really only been around their older siblings their whole, first 5 years, and then you put them into this classroom where the desks are separated by plastic, you have to wear a mask, and it's super, like, super all these things. We just thought that that was why he was having trouble with certain things, and then you get through 2nd grade, and we were like, something's off here. Something is like, because we were just like, oh my, like, is he just a bad kid? Like, ooh, like it was just rough. And then we started noticing certain things, we're like, oh, maybe. And so I got him tested and he was diagnosed. And I was like, this clarifies a lot of things. However,
Mm.
what we're not going to do is go to school and say, well, I have ADHD or he has ADHD and excuse away all his behaviors because you can still learn to sit down and shut your mouth and pay attention. We might just have to make some accommodations because Lord knows I'm almost 40 years old and sometimes I need some accommodations to pay
Yep.
attention. But what we're not going to do is excuse away your behavior. But it is great to now be able to understand some things because now I can understand why you're wanting to get up and walk around, why you're wanting to do this and that.
Yeah.
We got to learn what we can and can't do, but it is super helpful to understand, okay, well, this kid's brain is bored. Or, with us,
Yes.
if we understand something and you're trying to teach it to us, we're just kind of like, okay, I already know this, but I actually already know this. I'm not just being a bratty kid and saying I already know, like I already know, and now I'm bored. So
Yep,
it's
yep.
like it's not an excuse for misbehavior, but it also kind of makes sense as to why his
Mm.
brain is bored. You know what I mean? Kind of thing.
Yeah, and it brings in that awareness,
Mhm.
that there is a different way of learning or that they do need to get up and walk around and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
My second born, who is not diagnosed, but which is his choice, but he he 100% has ADHD, and we've kind of giggled about it for years. But he doesn't want to go down the diagnosis path. He's 19, like that's totally his call.
Yeah.
Um, and we didn't realize until he was later in his teens as well. But um, I was actually talking about this yesterday. He After dinner, like we'd sit, I guess now looking at it, we'd sit down for dinner. And I was always big of if we were home of being around the table and how important it was to have the chats about your day and be together as a family and all that kind of stuff. But he would be up and down and up and down and up and down off his chair when he was little. And it would get to afterwards, we had a trampoline out the back, and I'd be like, oh my God, 10 minutes on the trampoline. Go and bounce on the trampoline. Get this energy out of you. And then as he got older and was in high school, it was go for a run around the block. Like, dude, get out of the house, go for a run around the block.
Yeah.
And now it's so blatantly obvious that from him having to sit down at the table and have these conversations, he was like, gotta move, gotta move, gotta move. But I didn't
Yeah.
understand it in that way then. But also as a parent could see that he needed to move his body. So, he also got out of doing the dishes in doing that. But if he was in the kitchen doing the dishes at that time with all of that in him, he would have been flicking people with the um, dish towel and annoying his
Yeah.
sisters. And it would have been a nightmare for, I would have yelled at him. Like it would have been a nightmare for all of us. So for him to
Yeah.
go and bounce on the trampoline and do some flips and come back in, that was cool. It was
Yeah.
okay. He could put the bins out.
Or like learning, because I learned this a while back in life. There's certain chores that I'll have certain kids do.
Yes.
certain chores, while I'm gonna try to teach you the proper or my proper way to do this, there's certain chores that I'm gonna have certain kids do and others I'm not because they're gonna half-ass it or it's not gonna be the way I want it. So it's like, okay, what am I gonna have you do or keep having you do and having it not do the way I want it or leaving it, not thoroughly done? Which one can I have you do that you're gonna be successful at? And then rotate every once in a while to have you so that you're still learning this thing, but, and it's the same kind of
Mm,
like in the educational setting or in other aspects of it. Um, Having different kids with and without ADHD, learning how to talk to certain people so that you get certain things across. There's certain kids that might take certain things emotionally, and other kids are like, all right, cool.
yeah.
Like it can be difficult for a mom with ADHD. It's a lot to figure out.
Yeah.
It's a lot to figure out, but it's kind of our responsibility, right? Because we chose to have
Mhm.
kids and whatnot. But yeah, it's a
But it's a lot to figure out, but it's a beautiful learning, and to actually
yeah,
be able to see your kids for who they are
yeah,
is such a gift. And I know when I told my mum about my daughter being diagnosed with ADHD, I mean, mum's in her 80s, but she was, like, horrified and, "Oh, you're not telling people, are you?" And, "Oh my goodness," but I didn't think there was anything wrong with her, and I kinda got it's generational, I get
yeah,
it, but I was just like, "She's not actually any different, like, she's
yeah,
just her." Um, and, mum comes from this like I said, my growing up was quite strict, and it wasn't necessarily the healthiest of environments and that kind of thing as well, but
yeah,
she just sort of came in with this, "Ooh," view of it, and I was like, "No, like, Pippa's understanding herself. I'm getting to understand her better.
yeah.
I love the way her brain works. She's creative. She's very empathic. Like she's got
Mhm.
all of these amazing qualities and skills.
Yeah,
And sure, she's incredibly forgetful and loses her phone 200 times a day and never answers it because it's on silent and she doesn't know where it is. And when I was more responsible for her things, it was this like when she was little, it was this huge joke at the dance school that if there was ever any shoes left anywhere, like dance shoes, jazz shoes, whatever, they were Pippa's. Like, oh, this will be one of the Letch kids. Like, it's just this
yeah.
ongoing thing. Sticking to the chair again. But that was, that was okay. Have I spent a fortune on jazz shoes? Absolutely. In the
Right.
grand scheme of things, does that matter? Not really, because she was still doing something that she loved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing gift to actually have that framework to begin to understand, and then as parents begin to help our kids navigate that because this stuff is going to affect them for the rest of their lives. And when I was became aware of the fact that I may have ADHD, and then looked back on the years of coping with this is how my brain works, and again, it's probably another podcast, but there's part of me that's kind of sad for not knowing earlier, and has this compassion and sadness for younger me that was doing the best I could.
Yeah,
But there's
yeah.
also this part of me that's really proud of myself for bringing in those color coded spreadsheets because it's the only way I knew how to function
Yeah.
and to create systems in the morning so they weren't chaos when I was getting three kids off to school, primary school with a baby in tow. And um, it's okay. And the kids have learned, like you were saying a while ago, the kids have learned to grow with me in that as well. And they've learned to trial different things. And I'm so grateful. I learned so much of my parenting from my best girlfriend, Anna. We've met when we were both pregnant with our firstborns, and she's
Oh,
still this like amazing rock in my life. And be parented. I didn't have great parenting role models, so I was terrified. I didn't know how to be a parent. And I spent a lot of time with her. Both of our husbands at the time traveled with work. We've both gone through divorce. So we spent a lot of time together. Our kids are three. She's got three, and her three oldest are very similar in age to my three oldest.
okay.
And I learned so much about parenting and structuring and how to manage. those bits that would have been so overwhelming for me in hindsight, I learnt them from watching her and emulating her, which I've learned is an ADHD trait. That if we don't know how to do something, we learn it from other people. I only
Yeah,
found this out like a month ago, and I'm like,
yeah.
what? But so grateful that she was in my life so that I could learn how to set up my lounge room in a way that worked really well with 3 or 4 little kids. Like, yeah, just things
Oh,
like
yeah,
that. Mm,
yeah. I don't hmm, I probably I don't know. I don't, like, recognize experiencing that, but a lot like, most of my friends have kids, so that's
mhm.
interesting. That's interesting kind of realization that,
Yeah.
you know, hmm, well, we
Nice.
probably should wrap up on this one.
Yeah, think.
I'm I'm gonna title this one "The Long One."
Yeah. Let's talk about all the things in the world at once.
Right, right. Oh, but so, okay, so I'm thinking of how because what I had been doing on this one, um, was at the end, I'd ask for, like, one pointer that you would give on blah, whatever our topic is. Um, so I think that would probably be a good thing to still do, um, because we're still talking about topics on each episode. It's just not a different
Mm.
person with a different topic. But I think the pointer thing would probably still be a good thing to do. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can
Um,
both share our
yeah.
pointers. Yeah.
And so really so I've had two different co-hosts, very like guest co-hosts, if you would.
Mhm,
Um, the first one was my ex-husband because that's who I started the podcast with. And then
mhm.
I have a friend who, when she was more available, brief, she would come on pretty often. And we co-hosted with another guest a couple times. Um, but and so I had an introduction. The difference in the introductions was literally just her saying, "And Nadia," and I did the rest.
Cool.
But I because and let me know if I'm like, "Hey, you're doing too much," because I can do that from time to time. Um, I would love to have it be us, like, kind of regularly.
Mhm.
So I feel like the introduction should be both of us and maybe not just me throwing your name in there.
Okay.
Unless you're just like, "I don't really wanna do any of that," you can just do it and, you know, um, but I think in the intro to this one is
Mhm.
just similar to my other one, like, "This is Rhea, blah, 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 with mom brain, and this is what we'll be talking about," kinda thing. So I don't
Yeah.
know, if you wanted to well, let's do the pointer, and then I'll wrap up this recording and start another one for the
Okay.
um, so Uh, so time for pointers. Uh, my one pointer for a mom who either has ADHD, maybe thinks she has ADHD, or just has kids with ADHD, would be to be patient with yourself and learn yourself. Um, I've I know that with me learning myself, it's really giving me, an opportunity to be a better parent to my kids both with and without ADHD because, like we mentioned, you have to cater your approaches differently to different kids, and that can be kids. All your kids don't have ADHD, but when you have
Mm,
a kid, say for instance, one of my kids, like yours, very empathetic, very kind of introverted to the world, um, but extroverted at home. I am gonna approach certain conversations with her a little bit more delicately so that she doesn't get frustrated and so that I don't get frustrated because we both have ADHD and our emotions can kind of go like this sometimes when we're
Yeah.
put, you know. So learn yourself, and learning yourself will give you the opportunity to understand yourself more as a parent and both an individual, and navigate your parenting a little bit,
Mm.
I guess.
That's really funny that you should say that because I was going to say something really similar, but around the word I was going to use was compassion, like be compassionate to yourself because it
Yeah.
is okay to make mistakes and stuff things up.
Mhm.
Um, I think since you pinched that one, um, I'm just trying to think. I think for me, what I have learned, particularly in the last 18 months or so since diagnoses started coming into our household, is A, not to be scared of them because you learn
Mhm.
so much from them,
Yeah.
but also normalizing that the fact that people's brains work differently is 100% okay. And
Yeah.
it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to recognize that, like with my stepson, we were pretty sure that he did have autism and potentially ADHD. And yes, he has both. Um, but even though we were all, he's the youngest out of all seven of them, so we were all kind of, of the understanding that that was what it was. The diagnosis itself wasn't a surprise, but
Hmm.
it's given us all that. I'm coming back to compassion again, but it's given us all that compassion with him that when he does get overwhelmed, um, maybe in the past, if we're sitting around the dinner table, and our dinner table can be busy if everyone's home,
Yeah.
lots of noise, lots of teenagers, lots of conversation, lots of singing, lots of whatever.
Hmm.
Um, if he gets overwhelmed, it's okay for him to get up and go into the other room and take some time or walk around the house or play with the dog or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Back when my kids were little, I was in that you have to sit at the table. Um, and so was his family. So when he would get up and walk around, the older siblings and siblings would be like, oh my God, you need to come and sit at the table. Like they were bringing in the rules from their childhood. It's actually
Yeah.
okay for him to take a minute. It's okay for him to eat in the other room if he's had a big day at school. Like
Yeah.
that, yeah, and that normalizing of managing and self-regulating and being aware of yourself and bringing that in is actually okay. And if it doesn't fit the rules of sitting around the table, does it actually matter? Not really. Not in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's great too.
We're so
Be
clever.
compassionate, patient with yourself. It's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I,
It is. Absolutely.
to kind of piggyback on the whole like internet thing too, I think that having access to other moms around the world and moms in
Mm.
different dynamics has been really good for us as parents too, because we can see that not everybody does everything the same way, and that's okay. Sometimes we need to learn other ways to know that like,
Yeah.
hey, I can do things differently too. So
Yeah. And that understanding that I was just talking about, that I think a
yeah,
lot of that grows with being aware of how these things present for other people.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mm.
definitely. All right. Well, another fabulous topic. I know. I may have to break that one up, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Um, um, I should we do I guess where they can find you
Intro.
and find. Um, all right. We'll see you guys next week or next time.
Bye.
Say what I want you to say. Ugh, I know, Mom. I know, Mom. Okay, that was good. Thank you. Visit www.philology.net to check out our workbooks, autobiography, receive our weekly wrap ins, monthly blog emails, and much more.